This is the Tony Azevedo podcast.
Tony, good to see you, man. For context to anyone who might listen to this, not just this week, but for years down the road, we're recording this on June 9th, 2020. The world's still living within various levels of quarantine due to the COVID-19 coronavirus. And within that, this past week was significant in our country's history. We talked about it a little bit last week. You and I did, Tony. But it was all very fresh then, and we wanted to explore it more this week. But there was a widespread reaction to a horrific video of George Floyd that came out, who's an African-American man. And the video is of him being killed by a white police officer in Minneapolis. That video, on the heels of many other recent deaths that were very difficult to see as anything other than racially motivated, has really spurred a lot of emotion in this country, and has started a long overdue conversation for many people. I think that when something like this happens and it becomes a trending topic, I know this happens in my world of stand-up comedy. I think it happens in a lot of communities, whether it's a business or a group of friends or whatever. Sometimes people don't take that as an opportunity to talk about it. They're worried about it seeming exploitive, or the new term now is virtue signaling. And I think a lot of people find it easier to ignore uncomfortable things. But something that I've found really tremendous about what's happening this week, and I would love when we bring our guests in here for them to speak to this. It seems that this week it's really opened up the conversations to people that maybe were afraid to have them in the past. It's been a real smack in the face, and the outpouring has been, encouraging, I think, actually. So it would have been a missed opportunities in my eyes for us not to talk about it again and have an episode. And we didn't want it just to be Tony and I talking about it again. We wanted to bring in people who we thought could really shine some light and contribute to a good conversation on the subject. So first of all, Tony, thanks for seeing eye to eye with me and agreeing to use this platform that we're creating to talk about these things, first off.
Yeah, no, I mean, and thank you guys for being on here. Like, I've always believed that the more information that you have, the better of a person and the more successful you can be. And I think that goes in all facets of life. I think traveling has helped me understand different cultures. I think I've never, as a player, as a camp guy, as whatever I've been, thought that I knew it all. I always wanted to hear and listen to new opinions, and especially in this moment, and growing up now here in Long Beach and seeing some of the bigger, the protests happen, and having you three who are such an influential part of USA Water Polo, and hearing your point of views. And I think it'd be so valuable for the future of our sport, because I see it. This is a change that's going to change the world to the better. I see it happening. I see people outside. You saw the rugby sevens, kneeling over there in Australia. And I think this is a huge moment. And we in the water polo community, we need to make sure that everyone's understand and on the right path as well.
Absolutely. So we're welcoming three guests today. All are respected and accomplished in the sport of water polo. All are people whose views I know I appreciate on pretty much any topic. And all are also people of color within our sport with various ethnic backgrounds. So I think that it could be really insightful to all talk together about this. So since this is a audio medium, first and foremost, I think it would be beneficial if I let you guys introduce yourselves so that listeners can associate your voice with the person. So you want to kick us off, Ted?
Yeah, how's it going? Ted Minnis. I'm the head men's and women's water polo coach at Harvard University. And thanks for having me. And I look forward to some great conversation. The two gentlemen that are with us, along with you and Tony, I have the utmost respect for. They are true leaders in our sport. I don't think they get enough credit for what they do for the sport of water polo. I'm on a lot of committees, and these two are on all the committees that I'm on, and they lead them, and they do a great job of really promoting the sport of water polo out there. They were very influential in the D3 championship and the Coaches Association and all that. So I'm just happy to be here with them, and I just hope they get the credit they deserve out there. I really appreciate them.
Felix?
Yes. Thank you, Ted, and thank you, Tony and Dave. Yeah, my name is Felix Mercado. I'm the head coach of both the men's and women's water polo programs at Brown University. And again, I've known Dave a long time from our times in Florida. Tony, I've known a long time. Tony, actually, I was around when Ricardo started bringing Tony on the pool deck during the Camp of Champions when he was like a junior in high school. So I've known him a long time. John, I've known him a long time, and I think Teddy's one of my favorite people, except probably about 6 or 7 times a year, where I can't stand him. But no, thank you very much for having me on tonight. This is definitely a topic that's very dear to me, and I'm very passionate about this. And I've never been, probably this for the first time, while other times I've kind of touched on it, been disappointed and always hoping for change. But now I'm more like, okay, forget hope. It's time for us to make a change in our sport and make this something that we talk about more often than every 3 or 4 years when something bad happens. This is something we have to educate our great sport. That's mostly white, but that doesn't mean that it's not a place where people of color should definitely feel welcome in playing our sport.
John?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, for having us on, and this will be the second time we're on a podcast together. So I appreciate your hosting and the ability that you do to bring this forum in. And Tony, thank you, right, for everything you're doing for the sport and everything you have done and will do, and appreciate our new relationship now as working professionals trying to build everything together. And I think that's something that's important. And I think that like Teddy said, the two gentlemen with me on here are where we can say we're colleagues. We can say we're competitors over at different times in our life, but truly they're brothers to me. These are people who early on in our water polo careers, due to the topic that we're talking about tonight, we found each other pretty quick, right? When you walk on the pool deck and you see somebody that looks relatively like you in a place where not a lot of people look like you, you find that person, you give them a hug really fast. So the first time I saw Teddy on a pool deck, it took 5 seconds for us to realize, all right, we're going to be, really good friends for a very long time. Right. And I didn't have quite that same reaction to Felix when I first met him, but we grew to love each other very quickly over time. And I think this is, I think for us, not like Ted, like Felix said, and Teddy, I appreciate the kind words. This is not water polo, something we're passionate about. And there's a level of passion that we have for water polo. But then if you have to ask about our livelihood and like our soul and our spirit, the passion for that goes much higher than water polo. So what we're talking about tonight is the intersection of two of our passions. But I can tell you that social justice has a strings, pulls at my heartstrings much more than water polo does, right? So when I want to see both these things come together, that's the conversation I'd like to have tonight, and I'm looking forward to continue to have with people all around the country.
Sure. Thank you guys all. So, Ted and Felix as leaders of programs, John, you're more representative of U.S. Water Polo overall. How difficult was it for all three of you guys to really know how to react with all of this coming out, not just personally, but representing programs and putting something out publicly on social media? And John, I'd like to start with you on that because I really did appreciate your post on Instagram.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks for the love on that. I guess I didn't say my name, right? I guess I missed that part.
That's all right. I'm a professional, and I did it for you in the question.
Yeah, you're the man. That's why you make this easy. But my name is John Abdou. I'm currently the chief high performance officer at USA Water Polo. Former collegiate coach, former club coach. Right, been in the system for a long time. So, look, I think I appreciate you saying that. It was hard. Look, I think for me, on a personal level, I put something out on my Instagram that was a personal thing. It was about me. That wasn't for a company or for anybody else. But I think when the time came and U.S. Water Polo asked me if I was okay with us, putting that statement out more publicly, I was more than okay with it because again, I think our concerns are about the intersections of race and water polo and our involvement in that. And so, look, I don't think I said anything revolutionary. I think one of the I'm sure I'd love to hear your jokes about this, Dave. As time goes on, every company in the world has now put out a statement, right? You know, like I'm glad Gushers Candy came onto the scene, you know, a couple days ago with their statements, you know, on social justice. So like, you know, everyone's putting it out, but I think the heartfelt personal stuff is what's important. You know?
Well, I got one from PetSmart yesterday, and that was kind of that's when I finally chuckled at it. I was like, oh my goodness, we've allowed the country to get to a place where PetSmart feels they need to put out a political statement clarifying their stance. Like, what have we done? Well, you know, sure. But the thing, actually, John, that's exactly what I appreciated about it, was that so many people on social media are so quick to just jump to how it emotionally makes them feel immediately. Whereas you took a few days to sit and think and ponder, and you were very open about that. And in your post, you also offered opportunity for people to, hey, this is a good place where maybe you could go educate yourself. Here's a good resource. And Felix and Ted, you guys, along with the Princeton program, did something similar. You guys, instead of you know, just knee jerk putting something out, you took some time, you thought about it, and you guys actually came together and worked together on something that you thought could be that could help actually affect change. If you guys want to talk about that.
Ted, you should talk since.
Yeah, for me, it was something. I didn't want to put out a statement that was just checking the box. And that was something I talked with both of my teams about. I spoke with Felix about it. You know, I think me putting out a statement real quickly that, you know, Black Lives Matter to me is hopefully people understand that as an African-American male, that Black lives do matter to me. And I told my team, like, we want to make a change in some way. Like, if we want to talk about something, we want to be about something, and we want to do something about it. And Eric Reveneau, from the associate heads basketball coach at Georgia Tech, had a tweet come out where he said the NCAA should make November 3rd a holiday for our athletes, for them to educate themselves and have an opportunity to vote. And that's something I've been very passionate about over the last couple of weeks, is if we're going to really make change, or no matter what your political beliefs are or anything like that, you know, the voting is very important. And I saw a study where 18 to 24-year-olds, there's been a decline in the amount of them that have registered to vote. And so I thought that was important. I call Felix. I probably talk to Felix a couple times a week easily, with all the stuff that we do, and him being a good friend of mine. And I said, hey, I really want to get behind this thing, and I want to give my kids a day off, but I think it would be really cool if the 3 varsity Ivy sports actually got on board with it. And Felix was like, done. Like, it was, you know, and I called Dusty, and Dusty said the same thing. And so we went November 2nd and 3rd. It's my fault that we had to do the 2 days, because I give my team Tuesdays off, and I really didn't feel like trying to say, like, well, you already give them Tuesday off. And so that the reason we gave them 2 days off is because I usually give Tuesdays off, and the other 2 programs give Monday off. So, but that was something we decided to do. And I thought it made a great statement from the Ivy water polo programs that, you know, we are behind what's going on, and we want our kids to educate themselves on the elections, and most of our kids are going to be doing absentee ballots, so how to sign up for those, and you know, I'm excited that we got to do this.
And I think that people need to realize too that, you know, I think a lot of people will hear that, and you know, these days politics goes straight to the top, and everyone's it's pretty divisive. People are on one side or the other, but you know, that's important, Teddy, because especially in the context of what's happening, because, you know, there's a lot more to vote on than just Democrat versus Republican as the president. You know what I mean? You have local police, you have chiefs, and you have city council members. You know, those are the people that even locally in local elections control things, all the way down to who gets pool time. You know, I know that was a big thing at my house. I mean, I was going to city council meetings because I'm a water polo coach last year. We're getting a new pool in the area. You know what I mean? So, you know, I think it's important for people not to hear you say that and realize that, you know, it's specifically about one thing. It's about controlling your community and having a say in your community on a lot of different levels.
The educational part that you talk about of giving that day for them to just to educate themselves and be able to make a difference is, I think it's just the part that's lacking. I mean, it's so hard watching, like, I mean, we live in the mecca of water polos here in Southern California, right? And in Orange County. And we see, I mean, there's hatred, right? And it's all about this flag, when the reality is, if people just took the time to to understand what this was and listen and be educated, they'd understand that it has nothing to do with the flag, right? It has nothing to do. So, I mean, what would you say out there for those athletes that just kind of see the news and haven't really educated themselves? Or what can we do to help them understand basically what Colin Kaepernick started, what was it, 3-4 years ago? And what, I mean, it's not the flag. That's let's educate these athletes, because we get athletes listening to us, and I think they need to know more. They need to understand, what's going on and what it's really about.
Tony, you said the most important word is called education. But I think the one thing that we take for granted with education, it's almost like it's a one-time conference and then we move on. Where I feel something like this, it's a constant reminder. It's like, hey, it's almost like getting a driver's license. While you only have to do that every 5 years, but I actually think that if we were more on top of it and more aware of it, every 3-4 months, we made an effort, right? We don't need a month. We need a century of education, right? We don't need this Black History Month is February. So in the month of February, we talk about all these different things, all these different people that impacted, a certain race. But then that's it. I mean, this is something, and I think more than anything else, and one of the things that kind of pushed me to this was different for me, because this movement with the George Floyd is because I finally was like, I snapped, where I almost went into a little room and I just stayed quiet and just looking in the rage. Because I'm sure I could talk about for John and Teddy in this situation. This is our lives, and we've gone through these things where we've almost become so thick-skinned of the looks, the comments that we get. It's not as easy. I mean, I'm at Brown, an Ivy League school, and obviously Teddy's at Harvard, and John is the the chief. We hold these prestigious positions, but we are not immune to racism or discrimination. And I think that sometimes people think that we might not get that, especially in our, but you coach this school and water polo, you're so important. There's only so few of you, but that doesn't, trust me, if bigots are out there, man, and they hide, right? I guess the one thing, and why I'm, and I, obviously you guys have known me long enough where sometimes I get angry sometimes, right? But the biggest problem with most of these bigots that we deal with in our world is the fact that they're cowards in a way, right? And they only come out certain times. And yes, I'm being very passionate about this, because I really do think that's the problem. It's almost like we need to shine a light on everybody. Hey, be true to yourself, and if this is who you are, just be it. At least we know where you're coming from. And I think we're tired of dealing with, but I'm tired of dealing with people who passively aggressively, treat you in a certain way, and then all of a sudden you become paranoid, right? As a coach, a referee gives you a call or treats you differently than another coach who's white, and even though it could be completely just a perception thing, you don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm like, that's the first thing I jump to, because I'm like, it's what I've been dealing with all my life. It's like, of course, it's because I'm brown, and again, and I think that's wrong. I shouldn't feel this way, but that's how we're kind of programmed, and it's almost become second nature, right, guys?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is deeply personal for us, right? And so I think that's what everybody has to recognize immediately. So when Felix is sharing that story, we recognize that this is deeply personal for all of us. So when I first saw the George Floyd video, like, there's a cop in Newport Beach that did a very similar move to me on that, right? Like, when I was at UCI, and we all have stories, right? That, like, immediately we were leaving from the Blue Beat. If you guys know the Blue Beat down in Newport, right? You all live down there as water polo players. You walk You go out at night, you come back, somebody apparently robbed a liquor store nearby. I fit the subscription. I fit the look of who that person was, right? And a cop came running down the beach, tackled me, handcuffed me, pinned me to the ground with their foot, right? It wasn't right on my neck, but it was right on my back, right? But then they did that, screaming out all kinds of names of me the whole time. So you watch that video, what's the first thing you're thinking about if you're someone like us, right? You're thinking of every time. So that's one story. If you gave me another 2 hours, I could give you every other story where I've been racially profiled or taken by the cops, or how many times, you know, we've had to deal with this in our lives. And I know Teddy and Felix can keep going too on these types of stories. So I think what's important is that representation matters, because this isn't, to Felix, to your point, people don't know it's real until it happens to somebody they love or respect, right? Unless it's happening to them personally. So one of the things I told, that I think about you guys in your positions, is that you have a lot of kids at Brown and Harvard who then get to see you, learn to love you, learn to respect you, and then hear this story about you, and then it becomes real. Because maybe it wasn't real for them before, right? Maybe it wasn't real for them in this process, right? And now it becomes real because of you guys. And I'll also say, in terms of that education, that representation that we have, this is why I've been vocal. This is not the first time I've talked about race issues in water polo in an interview, right? Like, I've been pretty vocal about this all along, because it's important that people realize this. The question I would always ask in the beginning of any conversation about race, and this goes back to my days as a teacher, would be, and this is, Tony, to your question, right? What can we do for kids, right? In these things, when you're running a camp, next time you're running a camp, next time you have a group of kids around you, just ask them the two basic questions. Is racism real? Do you guys think racism is real? Because you'd be shocked how many of them would just say, like, well, I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure if racism is real. And then the second question you'd ask them is, all right, well, whether or not you know the answer to that question, does racism exist in our sport? On an institutional, structural, individual, personal level, does it exist? And you don't have to answer the question for them, but just ask them and make them aware. And I think that's the beginning part of it. And that's why people having conversations like this are really important as we get going.
Well, I think that's huge. And I think what this, unfortunately, but what we need to start to do is take advantage of this in the future and talk and tell your stories to your players, because that's huge. And these are going to be important figures in the future coming from those two schools. And John, you know, you to the community of water polo, to the ODP, and I'm 100% on par with that. I'd love to sit down and talk with you about, I'm definitely going to go tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and ask those two questions. And I don't want to get into, like you said, the answers or have them answer, but I want them to understand, and I want them to hear and be educated. And these are little things that all of us in the water polo community can start to do, right?
For me, that's the approach I've taken this whole time, is the amount of people who have reached out to me over the last 2 weeks has been amazing. Ex-players, former players is a better word to use, and fellow coaches, and it's been amazing to hear. And I think for me, I wanted to talk to my team, and I wanted to share with the kids in my program right now my experiences. I think it's important that I explain to everybody, like, I'm biracial. I'm half black, half white. My mother on a good day is 5 foot. Felix and John have met my mom, and you know, she's on a good day a 5 foot white woman. And my mom, and if you've had recruiting conversations with me, I say every day I try to make my mom proud, because if my mom's proud of me, I'm doing well. And my father is probably the strongest black man that I know. And I could be black, I could be white. And if I said to you guys, like, I'm a white man, you guys would look at me like my head's spinning. Society sees me as a black man. And I wanted my kids to understand I have the best of both worlds. I've been very lucky to see the good in everybody. And to touch one or two of these kids and have them hopefully spider out to one or two more, like, that's going to be making a difference. And that's what I hope that I've done with my little platform that I have, and that I'm a positive role model, not because I'm black, but I'm a positive role model as a good person and a man. And yes, I am black. And I think that's an important part to who I am and who I try to be every day. And I think hopefully that's what comes across to people.
So John, you talk about, talking is important and listening is important and everything, but also, of course, things like that, Teddy, action is important. Has there ever been a time, or are there some examples of things maybe U.S. Water Polo have done in the past, as far as maybe initiatives to reach out to other communities, to get a more diverse player base, to educate the people within our community? Is there anything like that that's specifically been an initiative by U.S. Water Polo along these lines?
I think there have been some efforts, right? Say that there have been no efforts at all would be a false statement, but I don't think there's anything that's really struck the chord specifically about race and racial injustice in relation to our sport. I don't think there's anything that's really addressed that directly, right? And I think that's one of the things I'd really like to see come out of this, right? Because I think one of the traumas that you're seeing when you look at us right now, man, like I'm trying to laugh as much as I can because we're trying to stay lighthearted, but you're looking at three men that are really deeply hurt right now, right? That are dealing with trauma, right? Like when you deal with these things, like it's an emotional and a traumatic thing. So when we've been talking to others in the water polo community that look like us, there are a lot of stories that keep coming out, right? And keep coming out in our past, and things that are integrated into our sport, into the systems of our sport, into the systems of aquatics in general, that exist, that perpetuate this cycle of racism and this cycle of discrimination. And this really is built into the structure of our sport. And so while I guess to answer your question, I could say, yes, there are some things, but when I say to address this real issue, I would say not yet. And I really am passionate about wanting to see some things that really address that, right? And that starts from the top, right? I think from you guys know, as a relationship with listeners may not know, but I spent most of my life as a history teacher before water polo really became like the career that I wanted. And I taught U.S. government. I taught 5 periods of U.S. government every day for 5 years at Burbank High, right? And when we need to know, so what's going on right now, these are the days I really miss teaching, because these are the days I wish I was in a classroom right now having a robust discussion about what we see and educating kids. And to your point, I love what you guys are doing about Election Day. The end of each semester in the government classes I used to teach, the final exam was registering to vote. You had no choice. You wanted to pass my class, you had to register to vote to pass the class, at the end of the semester. That's how it works, and that type of education, that's obviously built into our system, but into the school system, but it's not built into water polo. And so one of the things that I think we need to start to address, your question, Dave, right, to keep going, is first start understanding the history of how we got to this point in aquatics. So for example, everybody can look this up and see it, right? Just the history, and I tweeted this to your point about my post, is that the history of pools and beaches in America. Pools and beaches in America were essentially segregated forever, right? Up until through the 70s. So as long as our parents and our people were alive, they were in segregated pools. And we all know separate was not equal, right? It was separate but equal, but it wasn't equal, right? So what access did people actually have to pools and facilities? People of color, did they even have access to the pool? So our parents don't know how to swim, essentially, right? We got a group of generation parents who don't know how to swim. You ever try to talk to a family of color and say, hey, we want you to be involved in water polo? And they're like, swimming's not for us, right? And I could go on trying to be brief. There's a ton of history that goes with that, with the access to pools and the access to the facilities. And then in the 70s, late 70s, all these cities decided the easiest thing to cut out of their budget was the city pool. How many city pools do we have now? And we know this now. Even Tony and I were talking, trying to find pools to do stuff for the summer. There's only like 2 places that have city pools anymore. Everything else is either a school pool, right, or it's a privately owned pool. Well, why is that? Because most cities said, I'm going to cut this out of a budget, it's expensive, right? So then what happened when it became not a city program that was easily accessible to people, a free pool, a free community pool that people go in the summer? It becomes a place where you have to pay to get in. So that means swimming and learning to swim is a privilege. And that's a part of white privilege. And it's a part of the privilege of being in America, is having access to learn how to swim. So when that privilege is gone, that's what happens in the very baseline of building this structure up. So, that's where we have to begin. And then there's layers and layers as we keep going.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, John. I had no idea. So, I mean, going forward with that, do you think that with time, as more pools are being built, that with what we're doing to, what you guys are doing, what we're doing to try and grow the sport in general, that we're going to slowly see that increase that we want? Or do you think it entirely has to become a whole new kind of educational program for minorities to try to just throw aquatics and make them understand that they could be they're great in every sport, and water polo can be one of them, and swimming can be one of them as well? I mean, what are your thoughts on that, you guys?
Yeah, I'll let Felix tell you guys speak on this. I could go on for days. There's a lot we can do, but it's slowly happening, Tony. So I don't want to take discredit what's going on. It's just a matter of like real actionable effort that still needs to come.
So my opinion on this is I think there's a two-part thing. I think that obviously as a sport like ours, and all of us who are passionate about water polo, I think we want to see more people of color. We want see more opportunities available, right? So that's a little bit more of a long-term thing, because it's not going to be easy. Because I do think, like here in one of the things that we do with our teams is we work with the local Boys and Girls Club. Right now, 2 years ago, we only had one pool. Now we have two pools going, where we basically use splash ball as a drowning prevention program, right? And going back to what John said, because we're like, nobody wants to swim, but hey, throw a ball in there, like, hey, we'll get to play a game. And while they're playing this game, learning this game, we're teaching them how to swim and how to survive worst case scenario, like how to survive in the water, because, Rhode Island is the ocean state. We're almost surrounded by water. So it becomes more of an initiative. And I look at that part as an important part of giving the opportunity, exposing the sport of water to more people of color, or more, people that might not have the privilege, right? Because there's obviously all different colors that don't have privilege. Not just, I like to kind of make sure that it's as wide as possible. And, but I think that's one area that I think we need to focus on, but knowing that that's going to take a little longer, because how many can we really get? It's not something that's going to happen right away. It's going to take 4 or 5 years down the line, where it becomes part of what they know, community. Oh, we get to play splash ball. We get to learn how to swim, water polo. Now, the most important part in this is, like, sometimes we get sidetracked into thinking, all right, we need to get more people of color in the sport. And then we forget to help the people of color that are currently in this sport. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, and for me, that's where I'm like, okay, we've gone down this rabbit hole before. And then we get steer track, like, trying to create these programs, right? And focusing on that, and it doesn't work out in 2 years, and they're like, oh, let's just move on. Let's move these resources somewhere else, right? And while yes, I want to get more people of color of an opportunity to see what the sport's about, I want to help the people of color that are currently in the sport that feel like they can't be who they really are, or there's nowhere to go. Does that make sense? So I think we could address both things. One of them is more of a long-term thing for me. It's more like, okay, this is something that 4 or 5 years, let's see how many we get, how many more people of color we get in the sport if we go this route, helping different communities that don't have access to pools and stuff. And then we have can't forget about the people who are currently in this sport who feel like there's no one there for them to talk to, because nobody talks about it,
Yeah, it's the difference between making sure that one conversation is how do we diversify our sport. Another conversation is how do we make sure that racism isn't holding people back from succeeding in our sport.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect, Felix, because one of the things that I think in general we do lack in our sport is the idols, right? Those big stars, superstars that other sports have and they gravitate to, right? Everyone wants to be a basketball player because you're on TV, you're watching all these studs all the time, and we're not there yet. And when you are focusing on the ones that are in there, we will find more Ashley Johnsons or athletes that can be idols for someone else of color to look at and say, oh my God, that girl, I want to do that. She can do it. I can do it. Right. And I think that in general, our sport is something we continue to get better at, but we need to, I think that's something we are missing compared to the other top sports. And especially like you're saying, when we can get some of those more a diverse group of idols out here, wow, amazing that would be.
And I know that, I guess one more thing just on that point. I mean, the funny thing is I listened to Teddy's stories and John's story about water polo. I played water polo my first year. I went to North Miami High School, and Dave could tell you it's not it's probably a pretty rough neighborhood, right? Rough area growing up. And my high school coach was a straight up Jamaican, and he was a cop, right? And I had 2 other African-American teammates. So when I started playing water polo, to me, I wasn't the only one. So it was kind of easy to be like, okay. And we had a city pool that we crossed the street from our high school. We won it. And and so it was kind of interesting. And maybe if I wasn't exposed to the sport in that environment, I probably would have been like, nah, man, I'm good. I'm going to go do something else. Right. But I was playing football, high school football, and one of my high school football teammates who was an African-American played water polo. He was and I'm like, cool, let's do this. Right. And that's how I figured out. That's why I fell in love with the sport. So if it wasn't for that, I don't know if I would have easily been like, nah, this is not what I want to do. Right. Because there's nobody that looks like me. Right. But I wasn't the darkest guy in the room. Right. So I was cool. I was like, all right, this is fine. We can do this. So it's interesting how like, and I think about what you guys are saying. I'm like, maybe I would have totally just done something completely different if my coach wasn't a Jamaican. Right. Kevin Forbes, God bless him, right? And I didn't have Steve Smith and Kenny Vigil as two of my teammates who were like just amazing guys. So
Kenny was my high school coach.
Oh, there you go, Kenny. Him and I were high school teammates. Small world.
I'm finding I'm getting old, and I remember I was in high school in the 80s, and there weren't a lot of people in the water polo world that looked like me. Now the bubbles were smaller. We did not do a lot with Southern California, and I mean, JOs was still AAU, and I remember 16 and under, I got to go to Iowa City, and it was all the sports were together, and I don't remember seeing a lot of color at water polo, and so that's always been what it is. And for me, for being in it since the 80s and to see all, Ashley, Max, Amira, we're seeing more and more minorities in the sport. It's great. But I grew up in Menlo Park, and I spent a lot of time in East Menlo Park. And right now Brenda runs a program out of the pool where I lifeguarded at as a kid. And in the early 90s, I had my club team. We didn't have a pool, and I got that city pool. And it wasn't utilized, and they let us use it. And I remember being there and having 10, 11, 12 little kids, all minorities, sitting and watching water polo. And I was so excited for them to see it. And I like, you guys want to try? You want to try it? I can't swim. And I think it comes back to John's point. And there is a city pool there. But we need to teach these youth how to swim first. And we have to actually give them the skills to be able to play the great sport that we have. And I think we see programs like Commerce and what Brenda's doing in East Menlo Park, like those are all great programs that are getting minorities involved. And I agree with Felix, it's a long-term goal, but like that's something I want to see. I want to see us like build our pyramid from the bottom and support the top. And I think we can do that all the way through, and it'll be a beautiful thing,
One of the things I was talking about 2 years ago when I went out to St. Louis, and I think John will know exactly who I'm talking about, but was trying to figure out a way where we could create a scholarship fund that would help these kids, get exposure to playing at a higher level here in Cali or with a host family or something, and then creating, if they follow, if they continue to succeed, we can help create a scholarship fund or something like that. And then randomly, Janai called me last week to talk about it. But do you think things like that, these are little things that we can do and to step in the right direction to kind of even motivate a little more, like, wow, look, I feel like if there's a time, it's now to get the right people together, to whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's funds, whatever it is, to get you guys what you're talking about now and help everyone. Because like we've said, things have happened, but now's the time to take the action, right?
That was the premise of the program where Brenda is right now.
2020?
Yeah, it was called Project 2020. And it was to have hopefully someone from that program on the 2020 Olympic team. And this started in 2009, 2010. So it was that process. And I think that's, something that would be amazing if you can get something like that to help these kids, because our sport is not a cheap sport to play. No. I know, at least in the area where I come from, I know that club dues are not not cheap. And I know for when I was playing, I used to go to that Junior Olympics. I remember I had to go around the businesses to get sponsorships so that I was able to go to Junior Olympics to play. And, you know, so we also have to have some kind of like scholarship fund or something so that these kids are going to be able to afford to go. They're going to be able to travel, but you also don't want to make them look like they're the poor minority kid either. It's not the, you know, those kids. I was proud, and I didn't tell anybody I had to do that, but I was doing it, and I didn't want anyone to think that that's what I was doing. Right. So I think there's a lot of things that you have to do right when you do those things too, to make those kids still feel like they're pulling their own rope, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the scholarship thing is actually a little trickier at times. It's like, it's a little more like, for sometimes I think with scholarships, it's like a quick thing to say, like, let's do that. But to your point, Teddy, you're right. There's a lot to it, right? Because sometimes you give, and this is not just water polo, right? But you hear a lot of stories about minority scholarships that go to universities, right? And then when if the university is not prepared for that minority student to go there and feel welcome and succeed, then what happens to that student? They just drop out of school, right, a year later. So then what was the point of the scholarship for the first place? So you got to kind of create the path. And I think to your point, Teddy, too, you actually really, the light bulb clicked when you were talking right now too. You got to remember, like, probably for you in the 80s, and it was the same for me, and I know, Felix, you say the same, I was introduced to water polo at my high school. So I didn't know water polo before I got to high school. I had no idea. And so when I got to high school, right, it was free. Like, I was on the basketball team, I was on the freshman basketball team, right? And then after basketball season, I didn't even play freshman year, you know? And then afterwards I heard whistles, you know, people are swimming, like, "Hey, why don't you come join the swim team?" And how much did it cost me to join the swim team at the school and start playing summer water polo? It was like essentially nothing. It was free, right? So the barrier to entry for the sport was because the school was offering something, right? So to the point of growing the sport, that is, I guess that's one thing, Dave, I can say that US Water Polo has done a good job of, right? So when we talk about Texas adopting high school water polo, right? If Texas adopts high school water polo and 200 new programs start in the next like 2 years, that's a free entry-level place where a bunch of people are gonna be able to start playing water polo from all kinds of backgrounds, right? And that's huge. And the issue that you talk about, Teddy, is then it's not just a water polo issue. What has happened in America, and it's crazy to me, is that sports have become a private business. Youth sports has become a private business. So the only way for people to be introduced to water polo is essentially through this thing. And if you're just finding out about water polo when you're in high school, it's too late, right? I mean, how many people are you guys recruiting that didn't start playing water polo till high school to come to Harvard or Brown, right? Like, probably very few, you know? And that's an issue. And so then it becomes a matter of class. And then classism, right, can lead to other issues and can lead to other stuff along the way. And so, like, you know, if now for you to get a spot, to get to one of your spots, the Harvard and Brown admission spots, how old do you have to be to start playing water polo? And what club are you coming from? And what neighborhood do you have to be from, right? And it's this whole system that keeps going. So to break that system, you have to find affordable city programming. So your shout out to Commerce was big. So it's not, Commerce was, you know why Commerce is successful? It's the city of Commerce, right? It's the city that did that. It's a city program that started a long time ago, right? We're talking 60s, 70s, right? Program that started from the city. There's another program like that in Chicago, the Chicago Parks District. I'll give them a shout out too, right? There's a city of Hialeah, right? In Florida, right? City program, right? That does those things. So, right? So how can we start
John,
getting—
say it right. Hialeah.
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 Hialeah. Okay. All right. Lo siento. Okay. Tell me. I'll get it better next time. All right.
I believe the commercial goes, Opalaka Hialeah is the
Hialeah.
place to be,
Yes,
right?
yes, it does.
I forgot that I'm around a bunch of Floridians.
Yeah, there's those 305 boys right there.
Yeah, 305. But shout out to that program. So, but that means on one hand, we counted how many city-wide water polo programs are really functioning at a level that has produced players at a high level. So part of the long-term plan has to be that.
I'm sorry to talk over you there, but what about COLA? What happened to the COLA program?
Right. It's ironic you say that's a great Oscar Dorado. Like when I was at Burbank High, I actually sent a lot of my girls to go play for COLA, City of Los Angeles. So like I was coaching kids that were playing in a city program there. And I was trying to start something in Burbank too, in that area. And one of the roadblocks then becomes like city funding and how like the city operates. Ironically, I was just talking to the City of LA lifeguards a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to try to get back with them, right? So to this point of this movement and this long-term development is, can you get the city of Los Angeles to come back to this, right? Can you get these city programs and like build it in at a parks and rec level, right? Like can the Parks and Rec sponsor? Because then it becomes easier, you know, for them. And then maybe when they get to high school, if they had a Parks and Rec water polo at an affordable rate, you know, when they were growing up, then it's also, then they can be competitive. And if they're competitive in high school and the high school can support them, then maybe they can go to Brown and Harvard, right, to play water polo at a high level. So.
Oh yeah. And I think this, you know, the school systems, you know, there's a lot of problems in these lower economic school systems where, you know, these kids aren't getting they're having a tough time with their standardized tests, and, you know, they're not having the SAT and just revamped their tests a few years ago. So to get away from people being able to get all this high level tutoring, and they've kind of leveled that playing field with the tutoring. And, you know, that's tough for minorities. Some minorities are having a tougher time with, you know, doing well on the SATs. You know, I think there's a lot of, I mean, you said it the best. There's a lot of layers we can unpack on this topic. And you know, and I think that it's something that even for me, like in the open right now, like when it's the three of us, like having conversations is one thing, but being on a platform to have this conversation is even uncomfortable for me. And, you know, but I think it's very important. But
it is a little uncomfortable. That's all right. Yeah.
Tony's having some technical difficulties, just to let you guys know. He's going to try to pop back on, but he said to please continue even if he can't get back on here. Well, so, all right, on the topic of pushing it to uncomfortable places then, let me ask the question as, you know, a white person in this sport, okay? In my eyes, like through my whole water polo career, and, you know, we're talking a lot about specifically even, you know, diversifying from an African-American, I think, standpoint, but just in general, I think that water polo, in my experience, there's been a lot to be proud of the fact that there is diversity, even if it's not specifically in the African-American community. There's where Felix and I come from, a lot of people from South American countries, the Caribbean, you know, a lot of different places and different backgrounds and ethnicities that play the sport. Not to mention, you know, even just across demographics, like, you know, I went to college, I played in Miami with you know, a lot of people with diverse backgrounds. And then I went and played college in the state of Alabama, and my best friends became a bunch of dudes from Alabama that I would have never hung out with if it wasn't for water polo, you know? So, you know, it's crossed a lot of different, for me, it's cultured me in a lot of different ways, you know? I even have friends who are gay, you know, that I wouldn't probably met or known if it wasn't for water polo. So, you know, I'm very grateful for water polo, and I think sports in general that have allowed me to have relationships with people that don't look and come from the same place as I do, if that makes sense. So now you guys would be more in tune, though, I think, and this is where it's uncomfortable, I think, and it's something important to talk about if you're comfortable talking about it. What's the temperature of our sport as far as, you know, not necessarily the demographics that we're talking about and diversifying, but just the racism that might exist within it, you know? Are there examples that come to mind for you, like immediately, where, you know, you did not feel comfortable within your sport, or you had to overcome difficult things? So, like, John, you gave the example earlier of a cop, you know, who tackled you on the beach. Are there things like that within our sport that we need to be aware of and we need to be active about?
Okay, well,
Felix,
I think
you want to start?
Yeah, I think that in different environments, you know, the truth, like I said, most of the stuff that I've encountered, and I've encountered a lot, has always been under their breath, or when no one they thought no one could hear, you know, like when I played, and I played a couple years in high school, fell in love with the sport, you know, played club and played in a lot of masters tournament where, yes, the conversations that would happen in the water, or, you know, passing by, or when, you know, and Dave, and my reputation in Florida when I played, I was pretty crazy, angry person. So I feel like I avoided a lot more straight up confrontations because no one wanted to confront me, because they knew I probably had a couple screws loose. But there's no question, like, for me, it's the stuff that you hear, and you just have to like not even engage in it because they just don't know any better. The name calling, the words that have been used for me have been mostly, like I'm Puerto Rican, and I think the way I was brought up, it was pretty, like I said, I was pretty sheltered towards what the I got my thick skin was when I was younger, was avoiding being a statistics, avoiding what happens to my cousins, right? I was fortunate to get sidetracked with the sport. That's why, for like you said, I owe water polo, like I would almost say like my life. I'm probably alive today because of water polo, right? So I escaped that, and so maybe it was easier for me to like not even give a crap what people would say, because it's like, whatever, I've heard worse, right? And so I think for me, I think also because of the way I was brought up or what I saw when I was younger, I'm literally, for until I was like probably 30, I was in bed or I was home by 9 o'clock at night. You would not see me out in the streets because I did not, I know what can happen out there, and I did not want to end up being, pulled over in situations like that. Without a doubt, I was scared to live, like, because of where I could end up. So that's the worst part about all of this, right? It's not like experiences that had happened. It's like the stuff that you're worried about happening, the stuff
Yeah.
that you're worried about walking into a pool deck when no one looks like you, and bracing yourself for the weird looks, the comments that people are making, and I didn't come from money. So it was looking, I came in, I had a raggedy old towel. So I not only looked different, I obviously dressed different because of what the resources I had. I was fortunate enough that the club team that I played in, the older guys kind of looked out for me and took care of me when I needed, I sleep on a couch, I sleep on the floor in a hotel for travel. And so my encounters with it, and I don't think it's any different, like I said, and maybe I've grown to have thicker skin throughout these years, but trust me, and the worst part about this is that probably none of this is happening, but I would never know, because in my mind, they're saying something about me, or that went against me because I was this, or this happened because of my, and when I go into a recruit's house, if I do a home visit, like, do they know that I'm brown? So it's crazy because you don't know who really. There's a difference between accepting it and tolerating it, right? And people will tolerate it if you can get them into a good school, right? But accepting it is completely different. And I think I'm addressing more. I don't necessarily think the problem is the racism, because like I said, a bigot's going to be a bigot. I think it's the ignorance to it, the fact that they don't think it's really there because they don't see it. And I think that's those are the people that we have to educate more than anything else. So let me get off my soapbox.
I think for me, it's I haven't had in the sport of water polo, in other aspects of my life, I've encountered racism. I haven't encountered it in the same way within the sport of water polo, and I've really had to think about it in the last week and a half, because obviously I've had a lot of conversations with people of color in our sport, and hearing some of the things like John was saying earlier, some of the stories that we're hearing now that are happening in our sport. I don't hear it said towards me. Everything, things are more subtle, and I think Felix is right. Like, there's racism and there's blatant racism, and then there's just these subtleties where people just are saying things that are insensitive, and I don't think they realize they don't come from a place of hatred, but they just come from a place where they don't realize that what they're saying is something that is not making me feel comfortable about what they're saying. I think the one that probably sticks out the most, and it probably sticks out the most to the three of us, and it's kind of ironic that the three of us are on here and the three of us are friends, and the three of us are probably called each other's names more times than not by other people in the water polo world. And I laugh about it, Felix laughs about it, John laughs about it, You know, because it's not malicious by people. You know, I've said before, and I've said this, Felix knows, I always, my standard response is, I'm better looking than Felix, you know, like, you know, but it's that those subtleties there are stuff that, you know, as it starts to pile up, you know, and you say it over and over again, you know, it's like, you know, I've worked very hard as Felix and John have in this sport to get to where we are. And, you know, I'm 6'5", Felix 6 foot. Like, you know, I don't think we look alike, and we're at two different schools. Like, you know, it's like, it's sometimes it's just hard to swallow, but I think it's more the subtleties to me that I've seen, you know, but I agree with you, Dave. Water polo has been very good to me, and I've been all over the world because of water polo, and I love this sport. And just like John said, I love who I am too, and I love who my family is, and I want to see my two worlds be the best they can be.
Yeah, and I feel you on that, Teddy, and you're right. It is ironic that the three of us are on here, because if you catch me in an angry moment, like maybe I am right now, a little emotional, the next time I walk on a pool deck and someone runs up to me and says, my daughter's really interested in Harvard, they may not get the best reaction, you know, but I think I think we've gotten used to just letting that roll off our chest. Like, I think Felix and I were talking about that earlier today too, right? Like, we've grown this thick skin of just like letting those types of like what we call microaggressions, like roll off of us quickly. Cause it's like, all right, well, you know, I get it, you know, there aren't that many of us. All right, fine. But I think the more we tolerate that, the more sometimes, look, water polo has been great to us, and we're in positions of influence and power, but it also should not negate what we know truly does exist, right? So I would say we all know this, and like we've heard stories of, the three of us could tell stories about police brutality and police racial profiling for the next 2 hours. That's not what this is about specifically. Then we could probably all tell stories about specific, you know, direct racist issues that we've dealt with in our sport personally. Like, I know as a player, like, I was called the N-word in the water several times when I played in high school, you know, like, and if it wasn't that, then you could hear the other coach saying to the referee, look at the black kid, he's hitting my boy, right? Look at the black kid, he's hitting my boy. Like, I can remember a story or a situation where we were playing like San Marino, right? High school, and like at Temple City. And like, I turned to a kid, I got mad. The kid was beating me up. I turned to a kid and I raised my fist like this. I didn't hit him, right? I got kicked out of the game immediately, right? I got kicked out of the game immediately. Looked at me and said, and you could hear the coach yelling, hey, the black kid on the team was going to hurt him really bad, and everyone was really scared. So we're the threshold of what we're allowed to show emotion on as players, and then as coaches later, is very low, right? So I know that for the three of us, we're not allowed to express ourselves in the same way that white coaches are, right? Because it's interpreted in a different way. It's like, oh, there's an angry guy, right? That's how it goes. So I would say it exists for us personally, and then I think it's clear that obviously, like, and again, we could tell stories about all the other people we know and the things that have happened. I think it's important to recognize that there's individual racism, you know, there's implicit racism, like inherent racism and implicit bias that kind of Felix you're talking about, like the ignorance, like maybe they don't know it's happening, but it's there. And then there's institutional racism that happens in organizations. And then there's the structural racism that exists in our sport that has brought us to this point that got us in this way, you know? And I think we deal with this a lot because you have to see it on every single level, right? So like, I think there is a little bit of a privilege to say that, hey, because I'm in a high position in our sport and a leader in our sport, and because you guys coach at Ivy League schools, like maybe we miss some things now, but it didn't happen that way when we were growing up. Like, and I will tell this story, I guess, real quick too. When I was at Bucknell, I was hired at Bucknell as the head coach in 2007 or 8, I forget, right? At that time, I was the assistant coach. They hired me as the head coach. And when I was hired, I remember the sports information person calls me and says, hey, we just want to be able to put in the press release that you are the first person of color we've hired in a head coaching position in the history of Bucknell athletics. Bucknell University has existed since the 1800s. So the late 1800s was when the university was founded. And in 2007 or 8, when I was hired as the head coach, I was the first person of color they ever hired in a head coaching position, let alone water polo, right? Let alone water polo at the time. And they asked me, they said, hey, do you think you can we put that in the press release? And I said, absolutely not. You know, I said, no, I don't. Like, are you telling me that my race had something to do with me getting hired? And they didn't know how to answer the question. They got uncomfortable. So I was like, well, all right, well, maybe if the tie went to me, I'll take it, whatever, right? But like, that wasn't cool. It made me question myself. So then that brought insecurity. It brings insecurity, right? It brings, like, to your point, Teddy, about feeling comfortable in the sport. It immediately made me feel like, do I belong here? Is this right for me? Am I doing the right thing? And then to take the story back 2 years before that, and maybe this happened to you guys too, right? When I first got to Bucknell as an assistant coach, within 3 months, I went to the admissions website and I was doing some work, right? Recruiting work. I'm on the admissions website. I'm on the cover of the admissions website. It's me with a ball in my hand, whistle, coaching, right, on the pool deck, and I'm the poster child for Bucknell admissions, right? What are you doing? You're placating. You're saying, hey, look, we got some here, right? Look, like, come to Bucknell. Look, we got one. 3 months ago, we caught one, you know? And so tell me that racism doesn't exist in our sport, racism doesn't exist in what we do, is clear, you know, that happens. And I'm sure they tout you guys around too sometimes, right, to promote diversity on your campuses and things like that, because it's important. But I think people don't know that story. They just, these stories, right? They just think everything's there. And then I will allude to the dark side of some really explicit things that happen to people in our sport as players, bias from coaches, you know, nasty things from other players that exist all over the place. So, you know, it's there. That's why, going back to that question I told Tony to ask the kids, is like, ask them, is racism real? It's a real question to ask, you know?
And is there a protocol that people might not be aware of? Whereas if there are blatant, acts of racism or unfairness, that they contact US Water Polo and it becomes an organizational issue?
Yeah, I think they got to file a grievance. I think we got to get tighter in our policies, you know, and we need to have a zero tolerance policy. But that's USA Water Polo, but CIF, NCAA has a zero tolerance policy that's out there on racist behavior, right? So, you know, it's clear where the NCAA stands, and there's a place where you can report that in NCAA, and we're gonna have to adopt that in USA Water Polo ASAP. Right now, if that does have, people are listening and it has happened to you, or it is there, you can contact the Center for Safe Sport. You can file. Something happens now, you can go through the grievance process immediately, you know, to start getting out there and put it out. But I know it exists on all levels of our sport.
Yeah, I know it's getting late on the East Coast, so I don't want to keep you guys too much longer. I'm super grateful for your time. If there's anything that we might not have touched on or you think is important to bring up, please do before we wrap up here. But I think it's important just to say that, this has been, I think, very beneficial. And I would also say that what I've taken from this is, it comes from people individually. Sure, USA Water Polo, sure, universities can have policies and plans and all that kind of stuff. But I think that the biggest impact is from people within our sport individually. So, for example, if you listen to these guys talk about, some of those positive examples where programs have flourished at certain pools or whatever, make us aware. Reach out. I'm sure any one of these guys would welcome an email. Say, hey, John, there's actually, the neighborhood I live in, it's a very diverse neighborhood, and there's a pool that barely gets used. Maybe we could reach out to Parks and Rec and see if there's a way that USA Water Polo, myself and that pool can partner together to get some kids in the water, Or, hey, Tony, I saw that you're doing a camp in, Texas, and I don't even think it matters. I know it doesn't matter the color of any kid who wants to come out and play. If there's ever an issue for they don't feel either comfortable coming to play and or can't afford to come to play, I think almost anybody running a camp would be like, we'll find a way to include your kid into this camp. Like, just let us know. And, we want to be inclusive. We just need to know that the obstacle is even there.
I appreciate having the opportunity to have this conversation, and it's a good starting point. And I think it's something that, as John said earlier, and Felix, like, we're passionate about it. I appreciate you and Tony, Dave, so much, and your podcast, and just thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Back at you, brother.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. This has been great. I mean, I've talked more about, this is literally publicly, this is probably the first time I've ever even touched on this, because it's literally been like, nobody wants to listen to me. I have no one to talk to. And besides my little circle of friends that I'm like, I'm not saying that enough is enough. I'm tired of it. I'm like, okay, enough is enough of me just sitting back and just accepting this is the norm, right? Enough of me is like, oh, well, that's what it's like. That's par for the course, right? Well, no more is a par for the course for me. I'm passionate about this, and I've been, talking with with the two guys that are on right now, and more people of color that are in the sport. And we're like, it's not about being angry. It's about making a change, and the education part, like what Tony said, we need to start educating and then consistently remind them that this is something that is there, and we need to stop hiding from it. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to do this, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, and thank you, Tony, and we'll do Teddy said it right. This is a start, right? It's just the beginning. So it's creating an awareness, and there is no awareness unless people like Tony, who's, he always talks about the lack of idols in our sport, but he is an idol in our sport, right? He's one of those people, and Brenda Villa and the people that we need to talk about, and Ashley Johnson and everything. And I look at the two of you as men that everyone should be look up to, and I hope one day my kids get to play for you guys, somewhere where you're coaching, because that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to stay alive long enough to make an impact on our kids and our families. So it's appreciated that this platform is out there, and I appreciate all the work that everyone's doing to keep pushing our sport progressively forward.
Thank you guys all for saying that stuff, man. And I can speak for Tony one more time as well to say that that's why we wanted to do this podcast. I certainly talk in a microphone enough for a job, and I know Tony is super busy, and he works from sun up to sundown every day with water polo, progressing water polo, and it is exactly while it's fun to sit and talk about stories of scoring a lot of goals, or the time that Felix held me underwater in a scissor lock and and held his hands up and said, "Oh, I don't know." Right?
He deserved it. He deserved it. I'm sure he deserved it.
While it's fun, truly the motivation having a platform like this is to have conversations, whether they're comfortable or uncomfortable, that progress our sport and help our sport reach new levels. So thank you guys for being a big part of that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it, guys.
All right, guys, have a great one.
You too, buddy.
Yeah.